Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another episode of Research 101. Today we are talking about 3 bad habits of a researcher you should avoid. And the thing is, I've done all of these 3 bad habits. So I need to come clean. I need to tell you. Now before I come clean and spill the beans on those bad habits, as you can see here, you're not subscribing. And it hurts because I would really like it if you can subscribe, because it would really help me and the channel out so I can help more and more researchers. So please do hit that red button and click that post notification bell so you don't miss out on future Research 101 episodes and many other episodes I have on this channel. But without further ado, 3 bad habits. Let's go. Now, number 1 is something I am hugely guilty of, even to this day, but I've tried to minimize, especially since my PhD days, and that is doing experiments without planning. And if you're not in the kind of the lab base in terms of your PhD, thinking of interview designs without planning and just going and interviewing a participant as well. So this notion of collecting data without planning, and you might be wondering, wait, I do plan ahead, I do write in my book, etc. But there are sometimes other little experiments that you do and you may forget to write it down. You may forget to plan, look at what's the most optimal way to do it. And the problem is that it's not just about forgetting to write it before. It's while you're doing the actual experiment. Because you haven't written it down, you haven't put like a nice plan ahead, you start to think on the spot about, okay, what concentration do I need? What other reagents do I need? What other style of questions do I need to answer or ask? And then that eats up time whilst you're doing said experiment or data collection. And believe me, the amount of times I have found myself elongating an experiment, half-heartedly doing it because I forgot what else do I need, because I didn't plan ahead accordingly. Now, because I mentioned this as a bad habit, what happens is that you get into the habit of not writing it down, it gets worse and worse, and you end up doing a lot of experiments in a few days just off the cuff. You've had an idea with your supervisor or with your professor and say, right, I'll do it tomorrow. And you start to get everything out from your lab, or you start to get everything out uploaded on your computer, you start to gather the data, and halfway through, you're like, oh my days, I forgot to do that because you didn't plan. And the reason why I'm mentioning this as well as a bad habit is after your experiment, if you didn't write it down before, 9 times out of 10, you're going to forget to write it afterwards in terms of what you found, what other things you noticed that are worth observing and cataloging and preserving that kind of information. Now, looking into that even a bit more detail, imagine how much time, resources, conversations get wasted because there wasn't a bit of planning ahead. Now, to give you a real scenario of this, to try and hit it home in terms of something you should avoid. Me as a postdoc, I was planning some experiments a few weeks ago, and I thought, okay, I knew the experiment, I knew what I needed to do, I knew, oh yeah, I've done it many times before. And I didn't really plan it out. And by the way, when I mean by planning out, just write a few notes so you're aware of what you're doing, what you need. And I went to do the experiment, and I realized that I didn't remember what concentration I needed because it was slightly more optimized. And I went around trying to find the thing I need, get everything ready, start to prepare things out for those of you who know about kind of lab-based work. And by the time I did it, you can say my experiment got overexposed. Had I known which concentration I would have done before, it would have been nice and streamlined, nice with a nice workflow, and everything would have gone a lot smoother. So to hit home, if you don't plan before, you will forget to write stuff down afterwards, and you will have a lot of issues during your experiment because you haven't had a nice workflow you can have on your iPad, on your notebook, just there with you. You don't have to write a thesis long plan for your experiment, but having key information is really, really important so you don't actually encounter bad habits. Now, this is not just like a mistake. This can happen as a bad habit, so you become quite an inefficient researcher. You're not as fine-tuned. And as you know, for those who do research, you don't write things down, you will forget. 100%. Something Ali Abdal, who I follow quite a lot, mentions, your brain is there to think of ideas, not there to store them. You can offload it to a lot of Notion, Apple Notes, your lab book, or whatever. So keep that in mind. That is one of the biggest bad habits I have, and I hope you don't have yet. So I'm trying to warn you. Now, number 2 is the notion of cramming everything in one day because you think you've got enough time and you can plan it all out accordingly. Now, it sounds really good. So, oh yeah, I can do 8 experiments in one day, so then I've got more time to do this tomorrow. And a lot of people do this towards the end of their PhD because they're trying to rush to finish. I was guilty of this 100%. And you might be wondering, well, I need to do this. I gotta finish, whether it's your master's, your PhD, then I gotta finish this side project. I gotta do that. So I gotta make use of all the time. I fully understand that, but the problem is that you start to get into this tunnel vision that you forget there is tomorrow, there is next week. And something I mention a lot on Instagram, again, follow me on Instagram if you can for kind of shorter research-based information. And something I talked about in a reel was slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And what I mean by that is this notion of kind of quality over quantity, where if you cram everything in one day, if one thing goes wrong, it can have a kind of systemic effect on all your other experiments because you forget what that is, you didn't do that properly, so then you're behind on that experiment, and then you get stuck on that experiment, so then that experiment gets knocked off, and then, sorry, you have all of these issues that start to run around. Now, when I mention about slow is smooth, smooth is fast, if you plan quality experiments that are realistic, not optimistic, realistic, you start to hit those experiments a lot harder. You start to do it a lot better. And then you can finish it off, gather all the data, move on to the next thing, move on to the next thing. So you're less likely to make errors. And this is why I mentioned this as a bad habit. When you cram everything in one day, it looks great that, do you know what, I've got plenty of time to do something else. But if you have an error on that day, which can happen in research or something changes, it can affect then all the other experiments. And if you do the first bad habit, imagine what's going to happen to this habit. So if you don't think of experiments, you don't plan it, then you cram it all in one day, imagine how many things can potentially go wrong. And you can circumvent all of that by actually planning ahead, looking at what is realistic, not what is optimistic. Just because you have a half an hour time gap doesn't mean you can cram everything else in half an hour. You have to be realistic, and this comes over experience. It comes over time when you're doing research that you can see what can you do in a day that are multiple experiments, but what is just a bit way too much? Because without realizing, your hours go, you're there till like 9, 10 o'clock, and then you're exhausted, then you forget to collect some data, then you forget to put something away, then it costs money because it's now, contaminated or it's now exposed to sunlight or whatever. And a lot of that happens when you're planning too much in one day. And to add to that, this notion of risk-reward ratio also comes into play because you might think the reward is now greater because I'm going to get more data, so I've got more time to do other things. But you are increasing the risk. And for many of you, you may have a lot of expensive reagents, expensive chemicals, kits that cost a few £1,000s. And do you really want to risk that for saving a few hours? Where you can plan it nicely ahead, make sure you got enough time to look after yourself, because one of the biggest problems with cramming everything in one day, you forget to eat, you forget to look after yourself, you may not go to do any exercise, you then don't sleep much. And if there was one advice I could tell you on YouTube, is if you don't look after yourself during your research, it will cost you later. I'm guilty of it. I'm thankful that I've got to look after myself more now, but those bad habits become very, very difficult to change. Like even sleeping habits, eating habits, because you're trying to cram things in one day. So my urge is, especially the second bad habit, space it out. You're not gonna lose time. You're gonna gain time because you don't have to repeat experiments, repeat interviews, because you try to cram it all in one day. And imagine something happens to you. You lost all of those experiments. So keep that in mind. Now, number 3 is better explained if I was to give you a scenario right now. So imagine I'm in the lab and I talk to my colleague and I'm like, hey, do you remember that reagent that we ordered from that company that really worked that time we did that experiment? Do you remember what it was? Because I can't find it. What bad habit causes that? It's not cataloging everything that you use. And it's linked to the first bad habit, which is doing an experiment without planning. Because something might have changed in the past few weeks and you're using something new that is different to something before. And if you're not cataloging everything you're using, so the product code, where it's from, and even kind of those who do qualitative research, if you're not planning the way you sort out your interviews, you're not cataloging, how you use your voice recorder, your dictaphone, how you had your room set up and stuff like that, you then forget how to get the best quality out of your data collection. Those for you who are based in the lab, this notion of cataloging that you might use a reagent, you finish with it, it gets thrown away, and you're like, oh wow, that thing worked really, really well. Why didn't I note it down? It sounds really easy. You're like, of course I note it down. But how many times have you found yourself not remembering what particular thing you used in one experiment that worked really well? How did you do it? Cataloging doesn't just mean products, also mean how you do it. Now, this cataloging is different to the first habit because the first habit is planning an experiment. Cataloging is looking at everything that you're using in your scenario and make sure you have a database, an inventory on whether it's digital or whether it's handwritten of all the stuff you're using, how you're using it. So then if you have that, it is far easier to you then to plan experiments because you know exactly what you're using. And the biggest thing, why I'm mentioning this cataloging thing is many times you run out of something and you have to wait a few weeks for something to arrive. If you were to catalog everything, you know when it's going to finish, when the expiry date and stuff like that, then you can circumvent this notion of waiting around because you can't do an experiment because you don't have the kit. Yes, deliveries can be independent of your control, it could take ages, but my personal kind of good habit now is cataloging all the stuff I have and knowing and giving myself just on an Excel spreadsheet, doesn't have to be fancy on Notion, just an Excel spreadsheet and say, right, this is going to run out in 6 months' time, give myself an alarm or reminder. In 5 months' time, order this. And this is what I mean by not cataloging. Even the most basic things that, for those who know, PBS, media to grow cells, trypsin, all of these kind of very common chemicals that you use have a catalog, not just a product code. When you think a rough idea when you're going to run out, set yourself an alarm. Now, all of that in terms of a habit will take you a few hours on one day to do. To do all of it, a few hours on one day. Now, believe me, you will have a few hours in a day to do that, whether you're in your first year or your final year. Because when it comes to writing your thesis, you need all of that. When it comes to ordering new things for your master students, for undergraduate students, you need that. And your supervisor or professor will be really happy. There is an organized system in your laboratory about when things will run out, when you can order something. Now, bad habit of me, in terms of this, is when I used to order things, and then when it ran out, order another thing. I was like, I can't do this experiment, I can't run that, because I'm waiting on one little thing. Now imagine how annoying it is that you got everything you need, but one little thing you forgot it will run out quite quickly, you have to now wait. It's not ideal, is it? And that's a bad habit that I used to have. So I would urge you to make sure you're cataloging everything you're using and have a rough idea when things run out. I know this is very applicable to lab-based PhD students, but I hope that helps. So those are 3 quick habits that I hope you don't do, and if you do, I hope you start to reduce the likelihood of making those, because those habits start to carry on into your postdoc, and I'm a product of it. And if you try and instill good habits, which are the opposite of those things in terms of cataloging, planning, spending 10 or 15 minutes before an experiment, and make sure you have 7 days, well, 5 days. I know researchers, we all work nearly 7 days a week sometimes, but planning it out will give you that work-life balance. You don't have to rush on a weekend. And this is something I wish I did a lot more in my PhD, so I'm helping, which is why I started this channel, it's helped you to give yourself more work-life balance, less stress, more quality over experiments so you don't have to repeat it again. Easier peace of mind because you have everything you need in a nice organized fashion, so you got more time to do things in an easier, more simpler way. And this is the notion of these bad habits that we try to avoid, because doing them messes this up and it messes all of you up because you have very bad mental health afterwards. I unfortunately had that. So if you did enjoy the video, do click that like button because it will be really helpful for me and it will make me smile. And if you think I have missed any kind of key bad habits, do let me know in the comment section below of some habits you have. And you may be a qualitative based researcher, so let me know what bad habits you have seen in your time, and I'll be love to make a video or have a chat with you about that. Don't forget to subscribe and click that post notification bell if you can. If you want to follow me again on Instagram to have a chat or talk about kind of the shorter based information that I share on that page, amir.phd is the one. I have a second Instagram account where I show kind of my side hobby, which is photos and videos and drone footage. That's amir.lens. Do give me a follow if you can on there as well. And if you want to talk a bit more in depth and a bit more kind of a long-ended query, amir@researchtribe.org is my email address to do let me know over there. But in any case, I shall see you in the next one. Take care.